I wanted to talk to you about, Professor Marandi, a development that's happened, and I'm sure you have at least heard of Scott Ritter. He's been very vocal about Palestine and against this genocide. Well, I'm going to play quickly what happened to him. His house was raided by the FBI on now suspicions of FARA violations, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. And I just want to play quickly, Professor Marandi, a video of his response to the raid of his house by the FBI. They came in actually with a SWAT team, we've learned later, and have taken just a lot from his home. And we are going to hear Scott quickly talk about what happened.
All right, as you guys have figured out, the FBI executed a search warrant at my residence. The search warrant is related to concerns apparently the U.S. government has about violations of the Foreign Agent Registration Act. I will tell you right now, I am not in violation of the Foreign Agent Registration Act. I have not done anything that would do it, and hopefully by executing the search warrant and taking the materials that they did, they will rapidly reach that conclusion. I will say that things like this have a chilling effect on free speech. There's no doubt that I'm being targeted because of statements I've made about U.S. policy in Ukraine. I'm being targeted because I have made an effort to try and improve relations between the United States and Russia, to try to bring about arms control, to bring about peace. Apparently somebody in the U.S. government takes umbrage at this, so they executed a search warrant. The FBI was extraordinarily professional. I have no complaints against the personnel that did this. I do have complaints against the personnel that caused this to happen. This has a chilling impact on free speech. The idea that you have a free speech right in America, when you execute it in a manner that the U.S. government takes exception to, and they launch a search warrant, that is an intimidation factor. I can say that I am not intimidated, and I will continue to speak out, and I will continue to do what I do, because that's my responsibility as an American citizen, and I will continue to operate in that manner. So I think I gave you all the answers you need at this point in time. I would request that you respect that and let me and my wife get on with our business.
What time did they show up?
You know, this is not anything new in retrospect, Professor Marandi, because we had Serena Shim, who was killed very mysteriously for her participation in Iranian media. Of course, since the Ukraine conflict, we've seen.
I knew her.
Right. All right. Yes. And, we've seen people like Lee Camp and Abby Martin have their content completely scrubbed because of the Ukraine conflict and justifications around the same issue. And of course, there was the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, Omali Yeshitela, now under indictment for FARA violations. Professor Marandi, your reaction, because you hail from Iran, and we hear a lot about Iran's so-called authoritarianism. But what's your reaction to this?
Well, I knew Serena Shim. I had met her in Beirut. She was when she was killed, she was alongside the Turkish border with Syria. She was reporting on how through Turkey, ISIS was being supported inside Syria. And she was pointing out how World Food Program trucks were being used by ISIS. And so the World Food Program is, of course, an international organization. And then Turkish intelligence apparently the story goes back a long way, and I may not have everything exactly right. But Turkish intelligence accused her of being a spy, and then, of course, hours later, she was killed. It's difficult to believe that it was an accident, but in general, yes, I think it's amazing that in the United States, people like Scott are harassed and others are harassed. And by the way, I should point out that there are many Iranians and Palestinians in the United States who've gone to jail and who've been in jail for a very long period of time for no real reason at all. In fact, one Iranian whose name was Sayyid Mahmoud Mousavi, he was in jail in solitary confinement for 2 or 3 years. And I actually helped his lawyer get him out of jail. And it was all fabricated evidence. The United States used the IRS and other means to put him in jail. And in jail, he got cancer, and after he was freed, he soon died afterwards. But the reason why they punished him, the reason why they went after him was because he was pro-resistance. And there are lots of people, like there are these people who sent, I don't know, $1,000 to um, a charity in Gaza, and then they were arrested, and they've been in jail in the United States for years because they were accused of supporting terrorism. So there are lots of people in the United States who are under the radar, who are just stuck in jail, but no one knows about them. But fortunately, Scott is a well-known person, and I think the U.S. government's making a big mistake because they're only going to raise his profile further. But yes, it's this freedom in the United States only goes so far as when U.S. interests are not touched or not harmed. People like myself and many like me, we've lost. They've deleted my Facebook account, my Instagram account. My own students have come and told me that we don't like or retweet your posts because we're afraid that if one day we want to study abroad, they will check our accounts and then they will, refuse a visa, or we will get into some sort of trouble. So, and I know many people across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. I don't know personally, but I've heard that their online accounts have been deleted. So, but now it's coming home. And it's not just these minorities or Muslims or Iranians or Palestinians or Arabs, but it's people like Scott. And I find it really shocking. And I hope that Scott is not intimidated, and I hope he doesn't get into any trouble. He's done a lot of very good work, like many other activists. There, as I said earlier, there may be disagreements over who he meets or who I speak to or who you speak with, but I think that everyone who opposes genocide and everyone who opposes the war in Ukraine and everyone who opposes what's going on, what the empire is doing right now, we should all be united, and that we should defend one another so that our friends and our comrades and our sisters and brothers don't get into trouble, and so that we can work together to bring an end to these very painful circumstances.
Yeah, and one of the things that is striking is that I believe that this was done similar to Amalia Shatela, where there was a visit to Russia. These two individuals, Amalia Shatela, of course, his organization, and now Scott Ritter, they have been going to Russia at certain times. I think Amalia went once, and Scott has gone a few times to build people-to-people relations as an effort toward peace. And now, you live in a country, Professor Marandi, that's under sanctions. So I've heard that most people who go to Iran and come back, who visit from the United States, always get harassed. What do you make of this dynamic? Because it's not only chilling to free speech, it seems like it's chilling to the overall project that I think you and I both describe to, which is building a more peaceful world, building a more improved multipolar world where we can, exactly as you said, be united and work toward ends that are the antithesis of the genocide in Gaza and the wars that we see the collective West waging.
Well, it's not just Americans who travel to Iran and go back who get into trouble. It's people who travel to Iran from European countries also who get into trouble when they go back, or when they travel to, or when they want to travel to the United States. And I think it's very revealing that, well, if Iran was such a ugly regime, if it was so unpopular and despised by its own people, then you would imagine that Americans traveling to Iran would help bring down the regime, and with Europeans traveling to Iran would help bring down this so-called regime, as they like to call it, because this interaction would only further help awaken Iranians to their misery, or whatever it is that the West likes to describe it as being. But what they do is but the reality turns out to be that they don't want people to visit Iran because they don't want people to see the truth. They only want their mainstream journalists to come to Iran, and those mainstream journalists are not going to say the truth. If they were to say the truth, they'd be tweeting, they'd be posting about Gaza. Do you see any of these mainstream journalists showing outrage about what's happening in these camps, in these torture camps? No. And do you see mainstream media making a big issue out of it? No. So these journalists who come to Iran, they're not going to tell the truth. But so the Americans don't want people to come to Iran because they don't want them to see the reality as it really is. But we have to continue pushing. And people in the United States and the West, they have to continue making sacrifices. People like Scott are making sacrifices. People like our friends at the gray zone and our, whether in Europe, our friends in Europe, or the electronic intifada in the United States, or whether it's our young people on the streets of London or Paris or elsewhere who are protesting. All of these people we have to keep everyone on the same page and refrain from targeting one another, because this sort of divide and rule is exactly how the empire has been able to maintain hold over all of us for centuries. What they've done in our region has always been divide and rule. They've always tried to tell people that this other sect is evil, how this other race is evil, how this other religion is evil. You see Arabic media constantly putting out propaganda against, because they're controlled by these regimes. This race, this sect, they have these strange beliefs, and they spread misinformation to keep people divided. And that's what the Western media is doing in Latin America. Right now, for example, in Venezuela. I was in Venezuela for the elections. I was a monitor, an observer, like almost 1,000 other people. And I saw no irregularities. None of the observers who I met saw any irregularities. Many of the observers were professionals. They were from Kenya, from South Africa, from other different countries, and they would carry out regular elections. That was their job. So they were monitoring the situation. None of them saw anything irregular. And now the main opponent who the Americans are supporting, they won't take their evidence to the Supreme Court in Venezuela. If they're so confident about fraud, they would do that, but they don't do that. Why? Because obviously the evidence is not the real thing. But the Western media will simply repeat and repeat propaganda against Venezuela, and then most people, or many people across Latin America, will believe that propaganda. The same is true inside the United States. Those people who are resisting genocide in England, in the UK, in the United States, in Europe, they are going to be demonized. They're going to be targeted. So it is very important for all of us, despite our differences, our differing views, to be united and to protect one another, so that people will not be cornered and people will not be intimidated, and so that we could reach that point which you were alluding to, where we could have a better world for our children and grandchildren to live in.
Yes, indeed. And it's so important in this particular case, too, because I'm glad you made all these connections, because it is all connected. The repression that everyone is facing around this very core issue of the U.S. empire trying to maintain its status and all of the horrors that comes with it. It's so important that we are able to, as you alluded to with Venezuela, see for ourselves what the truth really is. But doing this to someone like Scott Ritter, or whether we're talking about Malaysia Taylor, so many others, sends the message that this indeed is a crime. This very act of just attempting to show other people that this is that we are getting maybe a reality that is a very distorted, or we are getting a message very distorted from what the reality is. Any final words, Professor Marandi, on this topic?
No, thank you very much. I hope Scott is well. I hope his family is well. I'm sure it's very difficult because neighbors will be concerned and people will raise questions, and of course the media will be unkind and they'll say all sorts of nasty and negative things. But hopefully everyone who has heard the news, they will support him and they will support everyone else who is supporting peace in Ukraine and who's supporting the Palestinian people and who believe that supremacism and ethno-supremacism and apartheid has no place in Palestine.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.